Welcome to Sacramento Real Estate. Tonight we're going to break down a deal of someone who's looking to move into the Sacramento area, our buddy Joe. As always, we got Aaron. Aaron, how's it going today?
I'm doing good, man, and appreciate everybody tuning in. Joe is, your average Joe. He's the average buyer, actually, that I talk to most often, average scenario that I find most people find themselves in. So I'm excited to talk about Joe tonight.
All right. So we got Joe is single. He's got a 670 credit score. He's a W-2 employee, salary net, not gross. I know we mentioned that a little while ago, but $85,000 after everything's said and done. In his bank, he's got $35K, DTI 36%, and the additional little curveball we're throwing in there is that he's got a girlfriend that makes $50,000 a year, who's actually Joe's girlfriend as of last weekend, and they plan on getting married in about a year. So this is a scenario. What do you think, Aaron?
Like I said, I come across this all the time, and when you're getting a mortgage, the lender's looking at three things besides the property, basically: your credit, your income, and your assets. So when I break down this scenario and I'm trying to figure out ultimately what's going to get Joe the best deal, basically, that's always kind of the goal when you're trying to figure out a scenario for somebody with a home loan. So, the first thing is the FICO score, the 670 FICO score. Not rock star credit, but, not, garage band status either. And, so that's going to be one of those things where when we're basically figuring out what makes the most sense, we're going to be comparing FHA loans and conventional loans to ultimately see what gets Joe the best payment. Because with a 670 FICO score, he is going to get beat up a little bit, on a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac loan. And it with $35,000 available for the transaction, he's probably not going to have a 20% down payment. So in the back of my mind, I'm already thinking about the cost of mortgage insurance and factoring that in as well. And so with a 670 FICO, the interest rate and the mortgage insurance is most likely going to be more expensive on a conventional loan than it would be on FHA. That said, we're going to compare both to figure out, ultimately what gets Joe the most buying power. The next thing that we're looking at is his income. Now, you mentioned net income, and I love that you talk net income because, that's how we all live, basically. It's not like you get to go spend your gross income. You got to pay the man his money, Uncle Sam, the state, health insurance, all that stuff. So the lender, though, for whatever reason, the way that it's always been is that we qualify people based off of their gross income, not their net income. However, boys and girls at home, when you're figuring out your budget, obviously, common sense would be use your net income to determine your budget because, you can't spend the gross, right? So we've got $85,000 in net income. And then we also got this, this wild card in the background of, potentially more income added to the scenario with Joe's girlfriend. So far, though, in the scenario, Joe is trying to qualify on his own. He's buying the house on his own. Although who knows, what might be needed ultimately to meet their purchasing power or their goals. But for right now, that's the way we've got things structured. And then the last thing, like we talked about, was assets, basically the money that you've got available for the transaction. Now, Joe's got $35,000 in savings basically for the transaction. So when we're calculating what Joe can qualify for, we're reverse engineering those numbers, not only with the income, with the FICO score and thinking about the rate and the private mortgage insurance, but then also we've got, a specific amount of money available for the transaction, and you got to be able to cover closing costs and all that stuff. So in this scenario, when we do all the gee whiz math that would bore all of you guys to death, watching this do, ultimately Joe's going to qualify for a purchase price of about $730,000.
Is that with the girlfriend or without?
That's without the girlfriend. However, I think that Joe's probably going to be more comfortable at it, like doing it basically, because it does stretch out his budget. Just because he qualifies for something doesn't necessarily mean that that's how much he wants the monthly payment to be. Now, because the girlfriend has the added income to the household, that's going to kind of add some potential flexibility. Joe's gross income is roughly like $138,000, but again, you got
Okay.
taxes and all that stuff gets sucked out of it, and he's left with his 85,000 a year. But the thing is that it's not so much the interest rates that, although rates are not wildly attractive right now, it's not the interest rates that's really going to carry the payment being as much as it is, versus the sales price and the amount of money that Joe has for his down payment. I mean, he's basically going to do a 3% down payment on roughly $730,000, give or take, somewhere in that range. So that's going to put his monthly payment, when you factor in, taxes, insurance, all the, pieces to the monthly payment, at about $6,000 a month. Basically, it's like 5,900 and change. So although he does qualify for it in terms of the loan transaction, when it comes down to his budget, that did exceed what his desired monthly payment was. But
Right.
you'd mentioned the girlfriend, and that added $50,000 a year in net income changes things for them. So ultimately, this scenario ends up working out for Joe, and that basically the whole idea is that when Joe goes out with his real estate agent Mark and his team, to go basically look at houses and potentially write an offer and get into contract, we want to make sure the two things basically. One, we want to make sure that Joe qualifies for the loan. Like, you never want to find yourself in a transaction and then all of a sudden it doesn't work because you can't get the financing. And then
Okay.
the second piece to it is making sure that whatever it is that he qualified for is actually within his budget. Like, just because you qualify for something doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you want to pay. But like we explained, in this scenario, especially because of the additional income that the girlfriend brings to the table, Joe feels really comfortable with it. But I see scenarios like this all the time, where whether it's Joe and his girlfriend, maybe it's Joe and his mom, or Joe and a family member, or even you and I have had quite a few Joes where they basically they're single and they rent out a room or two in their house. And we've had a couple where like the roommates are paying the whole mortgage payment for them or whatever. But ultimately, there's a lot of Joes out there that are, kind of in this scenario where they got a minimal down payment available, and they're trying to figure out basically how to really, make the monthly payment work for them. You know what I mean?
Well, okay, here, I got a few questions. Number one,
Sure,
status,
sure.
single. They're getting married next year. Is there a benefit of waiting till they're married?
No, not necessarily, because Joe and his girlfriend, they could go on the loan together right now. Really, the only thing that getting married would do would be changing their tax filing status. And
Okay.
I'm not a CPA, nor do I play one on YouTube, but that's not going to make or break their financial situation enough to where like they're going to want to get married sooner than later, or wait for the purchase transaction until they're married or whatever because of that specifically. If it was more so something like, Joe or his girlfriend, either like they knew that they were starting a new job. Like, one of the things that's often common is like the girlfriend, like you and I just helped somebody out with this. Girlfriend or fiance was, a intern, just got out of college, intern, doing her, I forgot how many years of nursing internship. And then she became an RN, and her income went
Mm-hmm.
from like 40 G's to like 150 or something, overnight. Or, you got a scenario where you may know that you're going to be gifted or inheriting money from a family member. at a specific date and time. And because of that sizable chunk of money, or the increase in income, like I just mentioned in the previous scenario, something like that, that could make sense to wait, because then that might truly change your dynamic. You just got to keep in mind that it's not like home prices are going to be in a time capsule while you're waiting. You're going to pay more most likely in the future, especially like if you're looking at areas like Folsom or El Dorado Hills or one of the really, popular
Yeah.
areas. The year over year growth in those markets is crazy. It's like 10 to 20%. So,
Yeah.
just keep in mind, if you do wait, we got to redo all these numbers to make sure, because the down payment would be more in the future, all those things. So, we got to look at all options basically, and then ultimately it's up to Joe to make an educated decision on what makes the most sense to him. You and I, we're really just trying to give Joe and whoever the client is as much information, data that they can have to, try and make the right decision. But it's never our decision to make for them.
Yep. Okay, so 670, my next question.
Yeah.
670, is that a credit score that you would say, hey, Joe, let's take a look at your credit and see if we can get that thing bumped up? Or 670 kind of like, you're like, well, like what does that look like? Because a lot of people like are so married to interest rates and they're like, oh my God, I want to get the lowest possible. So to 670, are you looking at that going like, hey, it's 670 is kind of low. I've been seeing a lot of 700s and this and that. Is 670 something you look at and you see if there's some things you can remove it? Or is 670 kind of like, you're pretty much there?
Well, no, I mean, at 670, especially if you're talking about conventional financing, you'd want a 780 FICO or higher if you were, gonna do a conventional loan without putting 20% down, because there's kind of two different things that your credit score plays a role in terms of the price that you pay when you do a conventional loan like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and that is the interest rate, and that's also your PMI, private mortgage insurance. So in Joe's scenario, the other, thing that we got to factor in is his down payment amount. That's going to kind of control like what options Joe has. So regardless of Joe's scenario, all clients, when we pull credit on somebody, that's one of the first things that we look at. Unless they've got like a 780 or higher FICO scores, we look real quick, and we've got some really great tools that make it easier for us to do it quickly. But
Okay.
basically, we look to see, is there a way to bump Joe up to a 700 or a 720 or whatever? And if there is a path to get to that that's realistic, then we will present that to Joe as an option. Typically, the path to get to those things that's like a realistic thing is like, let's say that you've got a Capital One credit card that you owe $1,000 on, and your credit limit's $1,000. Well, you've maxed out that credit limit, and that's taken a negative toll on your credit score. But if you paid it down to $350 or less, it's going to not make a negative, dent in your score. You don't want to pay it off necessarily, because you still need that credit history, the whole
Right.
magic formula of credit. But there's sometimes little things like that we can do, or advise Joe to do, that can make an instant pop, an instant change on credit. But then there's other things where, like, depending on how many bridges have been burned in the past with creditors, there's some things that the only thing that can do to fix it is time. Some things you just need time to get between when you had that bankruptcy, or you had the vehicle get repossessed and the lender did a charge off for 40 grand and you have no intention of paying them back. Well, the only way to like make that go away is just time.
Right.
But there's various things that can be done, but just because something can be done doesn't mean that it necessarily should be. So we'll look at basically, if it makes sense, does it get Joe, to where does he save money or he can qualify for more? And if so, he'll get the info on that. And if not, we don't even bring it up, because there's so many moving parts to the equation that we don't want to muddy the waters with, things that Joe's ultimately not going to take advantage of.
Okay. So then we got, like you said, FHA. They don't really factor in credit scores. What's that all about?
Well, FHA does factor in credit scores in terms of like there's a minimum FICO score to qualify. You got to have a 500 FICO, but until you have a 580 FICO, you have to put 10% down. So 579 and below, got 10% down payment. 580 or above, 3.5% down payment.
Okay.
Now, some lenders, because not all lenders are alike, but some lenders will add a margin to it. But for the most part, there is no pricing adjustment from FHA or from HUD for having a 620 FICO compared to a 680 or a 700. And also the cost of private or it's called FHA insurance, but the cost of PMI basically through FHA, it's the same no matter if you've got an 800 FICO or a 500 FICO. It costs there's no difference. FHA is very colorblind when it comes to FICO score. They're more so focused on basically your ability to handle the housing payment and also like your time from recent credit discrepancies, late payments, bankruptcies, stuff like that. Whereas conventional financing, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, basically you need a 620 FICO to get in the door, and for every 20 points, so 620 to 640, 640 to 660, and so on, it gets a little bit better. So in Joe's scenario, if he's at a 670 and the best scenario is 780, well, he's got a whole like 6 pricing brackets that we could potentially bump him up through if we could get his score up. Whereas with FHA, it's like it is what it is. It makes no sense to change his FICO. So that's kind of the fun and also crazy thing with mortgage is everybody's scenario is different, and there's no like vanilla carte blanche like, hey, this is what everybody should do. That's why you got to get with a mortgage pro, like somebody like myself that can basically dive into the weeds with you on your particular scenario to figure out, kind of the magic formula that gets you the best deal, the most buying power, all that stuff.
Okay, so now let's talk about W-2 versus self-employed. Whenever I say W-2 to a lender, they tend to smile from ear to ear. Whenever I say W-2 state worker, all of a sudden they smile even more. Like, what does that look like? And what, I mean, of course, both are doable, but why, what's the difference kind of between both as far as a quick qualification or knowing the numbers, like all that kind of fun stuff?
Well, here's the God's honest truth is that 99% of the loan officers in my industry have not taken the time to learn how to calculate income. And so when they get a borrower that's self-employed, they roll their eyes or they don't have the smile or like whatever you said, because they're, crapping their pants basically because they got to figure out how to calculate that person's income. Usually they got to go ask their processor or the lender, or, something like that. But I actually work with more self-employed people than I do with W-2 people. I don't know if I just like put that out to the world or whatever, but these days, it's super easy to calculate self-employed income. So if you're watching this and you're self-employed, you should not be deterred to qualify just because you're self-employed. That's a myth. But essentially, it's just the documentation that is required to figure out how much money is available to qualify for the loan. Like in Joe's scenario, if he's W-2'd, that means that he works for a company and he either receives salary or hourly wages. Maybe he gets overtime, commission, bonuses, PTO, stuff like that. And then every year, he gets issued a W-2, usually January or February, and that's what he uses to file his taxes. Whereas if he was self-employed, he doesn't get a pay stub. And depending on the structure of if he's self-employed, is he a sole proprietor? Does he have an LLC, an S Corp, a full Corp? Does he take K-1 distributions? There's all sorts of like different, complexities when it comes to self-employed income. The real hang up when it comes to self-employed versus W-2 is that, if I'm being honest here, most self-employed people, they're going to write everything off that they can. And because of that, typically the income that they have available to qualify for a mortgage isn't as much as they actually make. And so sometimes that can be a little frustrating as a loan officer where, self-employed, they just don't have as much buying power. But that's where you got to be working with a lender or a mortgage broker like myself that has access to loan programs that are designed specifically for self-employed people, like bank statement loans, P&L loans, 1099 loans, stuff like that, that they don't really care about what you're telling Uncle Sam about your income. They're more focused on the actual cash flow of the business. You mentioned the state worker. The reason that everybody loves the state worker is that they get paid once a month on the first. So I only need to collect one pay stub and a W-2. It's super simple, Simon, to calculate. Yeah, that's why, you know, that's like the golden ticket in terms of easiest way to qualify somebody.
Okay. So now check this out though. Okay. So we got Joe, and like I said, without his girlfriend, he qualifies for 730, right? Or does he need his girlfriend? Just to be clear one more time.
No, he qualifies, but it's like by the skin of his teeth, basically. He's maxed out in terms of his debt ratios.
Okay. And the other thing too is one of the things, and just go back real quick about self-employment, and this is kind of where it gets really, really crazy, is that like when you're W-2'd, I'm not saying it's a complete job security, but you kind of know what you're making. When you're self-employed, you have a tendency to make a whole lot of money, maybe 1 year, and you're like, oh man, I'm going to buy that $3 million house in Grand Bay. I've always dreamt of it. I'm going to do it. And that's where a lot of people kind of get into situations where they're like assuming that hey, the income's going to continue. That's going to continue. I'm not saying it might get better. It might continue. Good. But just try for your own sanity and for your own sleeping well at night to, even though you could buy a $3 million house, ask yourself, like 6 years down the road, am I in trouble? Does the asset appreciate? What it's looking like too? Just be a little bit cautious about that, right? Because like everyone has a great year and all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, this is never going to end. You qualify for the most amazing house and you're spending deep down maybe more than you think you need to spend or want to spend, but you do it because it's like keeping up with the Joneses. So try to make sure that you keep everything a little bit in check, because later down the road, if you start having a couple bad years and all of a sudden you went to that $3 million house right away, it could come up and bite you in the butt. So just be careful. Okay, let's get on to the next thing. Now, Joe ran into this house. And remember, Joe's coming in from the Bay Area. He's actually living he's going to be working in Roseville. Okay, so he's working in Roseville. He's doing a transfer, so it's not a big deal with the mortgage, and everything's good. So he finds this house. This house is, and we'll say let's say basically we got it for $730 for Joe. I knew the realtor, so we got an in. So it's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath. It's in West Roseville, so it's about maybe a 12-minute drive for Joe. 2675 square feet. Here's a little different about it. Single family, built in 1997, central heat, 3-car garage, which is nice, 7,706 square feet, and it has a pool. Really nice house. So Aaron, as far as you go, this is kind of like the ideal situation for Joe, or is this kind of tight for him right now? As far as payment?
I think if Joe's going about it on his own, it's tight. And if he wants to factor in his girlfriend's income into the equation, it's going to come down to, how tight does he feel about, their future together? They got plenty of breathing room if her income is, part of their budget. If he's going at it alone, he's going to be more like, hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. My 4-year-old loves that, but, not exactly the way, most adults want to live. So that could be pushing the limit a little bit if he's going solo, but based off of everything that we know about Joe thus far, it sounds like the girlfriend's income is definitely part of his decision-making process.
Okay. Now, here's the thing about West Roseville, just so you guys know, is there's a lot of new home building here. So yes, Joe can probably get this house still for like $730 and he's good to go. Joe decided not to go to the new home building because he realized that a lot of the new homes have backyards that are basically nothing in them. Spending money on a pool would probably cost him about $100,000. This home, yes, it's a little bit of an older home. Maybe, it's not his like ideal maybe floor plan, but he's saying to himself, I just want to get in there and want a pool. Now, one of the things about West Roseville, like I said, it needs to be built up a little bit. There's, new stuff being built there as well too. Now, it is like one of those things, if you are buying into Roseville, understand that West Roseville is about a 15 minute drive. They're still building that infrastructure, and there is a lot there's a lot of new construction there. Now, one of the things that Joe got lucky with on this one is that this is one of the few houses in West Roseville that actually didn't have Mello-Roos. Mello-Roos, what you're going to notice in West Roseville is that Mello-Roos is going anywhere between $290 and $350 in the West Roseville area. So for me, I was like, Joe, look, you don't got to factor in the Mello-Roos. And Aaron, what does Mello-Roos do to your loan?
Well, it just basically it makes your monthly payment higher. Mello-Roos is a additional tax assessment, a special tax assessment is specifically what they refer to it as, and that's how builders basically finance their development. They go get bonds essentially, and those bonds get passed on to the people that buy these houses, and so it's based off of the square footage of your lot. It's all appropriated based off of how much space you're taking up within there, but it's essentially additional property taxes. So not only does that eat into your monthly budget of what you're comfortable paying on a monthly basis, but we have to factor that in to, do you qualify for the loan still? Because, if the Mello-Roos is $300 a month, well, I got to add in $300 in taxes basically to your qualifying ratios. So Mello-Roos, it can be hard to avoid, especially if you're buying in the newer areas like West Roseville, South Folsom, some of the spots in Elk Grove. And another thing to keep in mind as well is that Mello-Roos can be anywhere from 20 to 30 years. So depending on, how long ago a home was built and what the status of the Mello-Roos was, like this home Joe was looking at, that could have had Mello-Roos if it was on a 30-year term. Most of them we've been seeing, most of them are on 20s. But that's something else where part of our due diligence, if Joe was writing an offer on a specific property, is we're going to look up the property taxes of the current owner to see if there's a special assessment right now, because it's transferable. So like if, let's say the previous owner was paying Mello-Roos and now you're buying the house from him, well, guess what? You now pay the Mello-Roos. So it's just with resale, it can be hit or miss, whereas new builds, you're guaranteed you're going to pay that Mello-Roos. So you got to factor that in.
Yep. I mean, with this house specifically, the nice thing about it for Joe was the fact that maybe about $10K, he was able to kind of like, over time, you have to do it right away. He was able to do a little bit of the flooring, maybe some landscaping. He didn't really have to go crazy. And that was one of the things that switched him from a new home to a resale home. Well, besides the Mello-Roos, he was like, look, if I get my brand new home, I like it. But at the same time, number one is I got to put in a lot of money for the landscaping. And that's going to be a pain. And I can get a little extra square footage in the new homes. I mean, I got you got every builder underneath the sun building there. But then I got to add in for the furniture and everything too. Now, the negative that Joe was able to suck it up on this one was the fact that he's like, well, you know what? I know the new homes are more energy efficient, because they are, but he's like, because I'm on Roseville Electric, pretty much par with SMUD and not on PG&E, is like, I'm okay with it. He checked the electricity bill as far as on the previous owners, and he was okay with it. So the end of the story is Joe and his fiance got this house. They moved into it and they're happy with it. And this is kind of the story of Joe, and Joe moving into a house that would work for him. And hopefully you guys, if you guys are in a situation where maybe there's a scenario that you guys want us to run over or talk a little bit about, let us know. We're going to be doing these things, or we're going to maybe start doing a little bit more of these things on Monday for you guys. So that way you guys can kind of understand. Now, if you do like have a scenario specifically and you're like, hey, look, this is my scenario. I kind of want to keep anonymous, but like, this is what I'm looking like. This is kind of the price point we're looking at. Let us know in the comments below, or reach out to us directly. As you always know, we always throw up the phone number and we can talk about your scenario and bring it on one of our future shows and go over this. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. Aaron, thank you for all your wisdom in the loan arena. And that's it. I think we're done.